this one more time.
Okay.
I just got a note that my exchange student from Brazil is watching live right now.
We are live. Welcome to the Squatchers Lounge podcast. With me, as always, the host, Mr. Reverend Jeffrey Kelly, and his beautiful, handsome sidekick, the ex-supermodel, Kip Morrill. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up.
Welcome once again to a live podcast of the Squatchers on Podcast. I'm Reverend Jeff, and with me always by my side is Kip Morrill. How you doing today, Kip?
Jeff, I am doing fantastic. It's a beautiful spring day here in Northern California. I'm inside, which is, I guess, kind of counterproductive for a beautiful day. But I'm glad to be here and looking forward to the show and talking with Tyler.
That's right. It is a beautiful spring day here in Tennessee as well. It is St. Patrick's Day, and we're going to have a great type of podcast today. We're going to be talking to Tyler Huggins, a BFRO field investigator, and we're going to be talking about boots-on-the-ground investigations today. So what I'm going to do now is hand it over to Kip, and we're going to get the views from Kipistan. How about it, Kip?
All right, Jeff. Well, this week, the view from Kipistan is going to be talking about the future of Bigfooting. So imagine for a moment that you're 9 years old. You're totally interested in the thought of a giant, unidentified, bipedal ape-like creature roaming the forests of North America. You might be the only one in your class, but then again, there may be a few others. It's 1977, and there's no internet or email or even cell phones. So you head to the local library and you read everything you can get your hands on the subject. You read about John Green, Roger Patterson, Bob Gimlin, Rene DeHinden, Bob Titmus, and Peter Burns. But while walking through the local bookstore, you actually find some John Green books about Bigfoot that you can actually buy. So you get your mom to help you pick up and pay for a couple of books. They were $3 back then. So now imagine finding out that all of those Bigfooters were camping out in the area to do some research, and that you were invited to come out for an evening, to hang out around the fire, have dinner, and go out in the field. You'd never forget that experience, would you? Maybe that would inspire you to keep on in your pursuit of the truth. Well, I found some of my original Bigfoot books last week, still with my name and address written in the front cover of each in that same 9-year-old handwriting. It's funny that I'd find these cherished relics a mere month after attending an awesome winter expedition over on the Northern California coast with some of the most respected Bigfoot researchers in the field. I'm always humbled to be in this sort of company and liken it to being the bat boy at the All-Star game. But hey, I'm at the game. On our last night, we were joined by a 7-year-old boy named Eli. As we were to learn, he was really into Bigfooting and even started his own club. Eli's parents had learned through a family member that the group was going to be nearby and wanted to know if they could bring Eli out for a visit. The overwhelming response was absolutely. So late in that afternoon, Eli came for his visit. He was treated to all kinds of Bigfooting technology as well as theory and technique. And as Roe gave him his Tammy Murray original Sasquatch necklace, he declared it was the best night of his life. Now, that's a pretty big statement to make, even for a 7-year-old. But think about it. In 20 years, when he's sitting around the campfire with the next generation of Bigfoot researchers, he can say, yeah, I'll never forget the time I got to hang out with Bart Catino, Rob Leiterman, Kirk Brandenburg, Rowdy Kelly, Rosa Havey. I was 7 years old, and those guys really took me under their wing. And imagine the collective response from all his buddies. No way. So as we go about our research and continue with our passion, remember that there are future Bigfooters out there who we want to see carry the torch. It's possible that we might all be dead and gone when that big discovery is finally made. So I'd say we owe it to ourselves to empower the next generation to be curious enough, just crazy enough, to keep up with their pursuits of the truth. Taking that little bit of time with the next generation goes a long, long way. Because remember, we were all 7 years old once, and let's not try to forget what that was like. Jeff, that's the view from Kipistan.
That's awesome, Kip. You need to make sure that you add Kip Morrill to that long list of great Bigfooters out there too, man. I know for a fact that you go out there and you do your best, especially when you're out with the big guys out there. Well, today we've got Tyler Huggins from the BFRO with us today, and let's go ahead and why don't you go ahead and introduce the folks to Tyler there, Kip.
All right, Tyler Huggins has been researching Sasquatch since his first encounter in 1991. Colleagues know him as someone who has the utmost regard for scientific methods and critical thinking, and who approaches his work with uncommon and not always appreciated skepticism, objectivity, and candor. Inquisitive open-mindedness and resourceful persistence have garnered the evidence and experience he has accumulated to date. So let's welcome Tyler Huggins to the show.
All right, welcome aboard, Tyler. How you doing today?
Thanks, guys. Pretty good. Freezing up here. Interesting to hear that you're having nice weather. We've got blizzard.
Oh, wow. Yeah, see, I live here at the foothills of the Smokies. I live about 90 miles from the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And I live on the wrong side of the mountain, so I don't get snow. I mean, we had like 2 dustings today. Now, the park's had like 9 feet this year, but, you know, we don't ever get up quite that far. Pardon me. So, Tyler, tell us a little about yourself. You know, how did you actually get involved with the BFRO?
A bit of a long road, I guess. So, as Kip mentioned, I mean, my encounter was in '91. I didn't really have a lot to be able to do to connect with anybody about that. I didn't know anybody else had any sightings or experiences until like '97 or so. I finally got internet, and the first thing I did was I wasn't even Googling at the time. I think it was on Excite search or whatever, trying to find out more information about what had happened to me. And
well, let's go ahead and stop you there. Let's back up just
Sure.
a little bit. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about your encounter in '91? Tell us what happened.
Sure.
Can't just skip over that. I mean, we love Bigfoot
Yes.
stories.
Yeah, it's one of those things you told so many times it starts to sound like it's just by rote. But it was me and my brother and another 5 friends of mine. I was living in Canmore, which is just outside of Banff National Park. So my roommate and then 3 friends of ours that were all brothers of each other, and then my younger brother. I was 19, he was 12. We were all on a hike near Lake Louise. And coming down from the hike, we'd spent the day up on the mountain. We were coming back down. We'd gotten back into the tree line. We'd hiked above the tree line. And we were all spread out, maybe 30 yards between each of us coming back down the trail. And there was my roommate, and then behind him by maybe 30 yards my brother, and then behind him by maybe 30 yards was me, and then behind me was the 3 friends and their dog.
Was this a hiking trail type of situation? I mean, it's something that's well traveled by humans.
Yeah, fairly well traveled. It's just a moderate hike. Yeah, like you get people out there with their pets and stuff. It wasn't anything too serious. It's called the Stanley Glacier hike. And coming back down, all of a sudden the friend's dog goes tearing past me, yapping and barking, shoots past me, chasing something. And I just and I heard a commotion up front, and I just sort of wrote it off as, you know, we're going to see more elk or more bear or everything else that we see around Banff all the time. And so my friends, though, were their dog doesn't usually go chasing after stuff like that, so they were kind of surprised, and they went tearing past me chasing the dog, and then I sort of jogged to catch up, and everybody's lined up along the side of this trail looking down a fairly steep incline, probably 65, maybe 70 degrees. And it also had a forest fire about 20 years prior, so it was very crisscrossed with all fallen timber. And I sort of walk up, and something's running through the trees. I can't get a great look at it. I just see like flashes of fur and something going through the trees. I mean,
Something running
Yeah.
through the trees. So that's a little different than something moving through the trees.
True, yeah, it's running and the dog's chasing after it, and it's making a huge commotion. And I'm asking this.
People don't realize that when a bear moves through the trees, even when the dog's coming at it, it doesn't move very fast. You know, these
Right.
aren't, bears are very lumbersome creatures, and they normally stop and confront more than run away. So
no.
if something's running through the trees, it's not bear-like type of activity at that point.
True, and I'll tell you the truth. I wasn't really seeing enough that without the follow-up to this, I wouldn't have necessarily known what I was seeing, but I just said, what's going on? And everybody was kind of confused, and only my brother had really had the good look at it. Something had crossed right in front of him. So I said, what's going on? And my brother just very matter of fact just goes, I don't know, some kid just jumped across the path from up there and went across down the other side. Then I said, what do you mean some kid? And he goes, well, I don't know, he's taller than me, not as tall as you. And I said, well, how old? He said, older than me, not as old as you. And I said, what color hair? And he said, kind of blonde. And then I kept pushing it. I couldn't figure out why this kid was by himself because, he's a young teenager. And why was he going off the trail on this very precarious slope? And it was actually quite a bit of questioning to my brother before it finally started dawning on all of us that this wasn't quite normal. I was saying, well, what kind of clothes was he wearing? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, what kind of shirt? Was it like a park ranger shirt where you could see like, vest, or like it had a, one of those reflective X's on it or something? And he's sort of looking, and he's sort of looking up in the air, kind of going, I don't know. He just had really long hair. I couldn't really see his shirt. And so then I moved to the pants. I was like, okay, what about, was it shorts or pants? well, I don't know. It seemed like his hair was all down his back.
Right, he had hair clear down to his ankles.
Yeah, and then I'm like, well, you couldn't even tell his pants or shorts. He goes, well, no, it seemed like the hair was like right down to the ground. It was covering everything.
Long hair.
It's like, well, was it covering everything, or was there just like no clothes? And he's like, I couldn't see any clothes. There was just hair all the way to the ground. And as he's saying that last part, the dog has this thing, quote unquote, treed. The chase has stopped, but suddenly we hear the sound of this tree starting to be felled, like starting to fall, like the long creak, creak, creak as it's starting to fall over, and then it stops and goes back, and then creak, and then goes back. And it does about 4 or 5 times before we can finally pick out the top of the tree about 7 yards down the slope. And it's a pretty substantial lodgepole pine, which don't get that big, but, so it was tall enough. It was probably about, I would guess from the height, was probably around 8 inches around at the base. And finally, on about the 5th creek, it gets pushed right over. The dog goes dead quiet. My friends start freaking out that their dog's dead, so they try to go down this slope. And in 30 seconds of trying to get down the slope, they only get like 5 feet because it's so steep and so crisscrossed with this fallen timber, they can't get anywhere. Whereas this thing, my brother said it went across the path and bounded across these fallen timber down the slope. So, it was just a matter of elimination of, okay, it wasn't a deer. He didn't confuse a kid for a deer. He didn't confuse a kid for a bear. So the only thing that's left is a guy in a costume who would then have to jump across all this fallen timber and push over a tree. So it pretty quickly eliminated everything. And I think it's almost because I didn't get a good look at it that I've stayed so curious all these years, whereas he hasn't really put any of the same effort in about it that I have.
Right. I've got an interview coming up with a suit maker, and we're going to talk about with him how difficult it is actually to move and actually do anything in one of these Bigfoot suits that everybody wants to claim it's a man in a suit. Yeah, the cheap gorilla suit stuff that we see on YouTube a lot is easily producible, and yeah, you can walk around in those. But the more compelling ones where there's big muscles and, somebody's in a real, like, if Patterson was a fake film, you'd only be able to move like 10 feet in that thing. You wouldn't be able to bound across the pathway and jump from timber to timber and get away from a dog. And it's interesting you say that it was a pine, because pines are, they're not easy to break. They're not easy to push over. Pines have deep roots, and the material, the wood itself is very springy.
Yeah.
It's very forgiving. So for it to have been able to push over even an 8-inch round pine, that's all, it would be.
Well, and I think there's a good chance we could only see the top of that one, and there was a bit of growth still on the top, but I think there's a good chance it was pretty much dead from the forest fire. There probably wasn't a lot of life left in it, so it would have made it a little bit easier. But still, yeah, I mean, it took some strength for sure.
Okay.
I always think it's one of the most interesting things when I'm hearing some of these accounts. It's like the story talking about how trying to make sense of the fact that it wasn't wearing clothes, but the wheels are clicking and something's not. It's taking a while for the brain to process. What am I looking at?
Especially for an 11-year-old kid. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the whole event was what, 65 seconds maybe?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
It's never long. It's never, it's never a half an hour encounter like some of the other things, some of the other projects that we know are coming up, and the evidence is being released of that. And that was one of the things that I wanted to talk to people about was, daytime sightings are very, very rare to begin with, and nighttime sightings are often so misleading you don't really know what you're looking at.
Well, you bring up an interesting point there, Jeffrey, that I think I might, just for the sake of debate, take a little bit of issue with on. I actually don't like describing them as nocturnal. I think they're cathermal. I think they take a short period of naps throughout the day and night, because there's actually, you go through, for instance, the BFRO database, you get a ton of daylight sightings.
I agree with you there. As far as not being nocturnal, after 15 years of Florida research throughout the Ocala National Forest, where the Sasquatch are the same type of animal that we have here in Tennessee, dusk and right before dawn were always the most active times that I ever had around what I would consider a Class B or a Class V, encounter with them. So the daytime I can see, especially early morning. Early morning is, a lot of animals are up and scavenging early morning because that's when all the kills were made through the night and are left over. The coyotes have left over half of the deer laying there, and, Mr. Skunkade can walk by, pick up a big old leg, and, he's got protein for the day.
Well, I'd say 3 of my strongest encounters were mid-afternoon, like 2, 3 o'clock. One really good audio encounter evening, and then a few nighttime. So it just seems really evenly sort of split between the different time zones. So.
Now, go ahead, Kip.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I'd almost say that they would be maybe termed more opportunistic. So whatever that food source is, whatever that opportunity is, if it's a full moon, maybe it's a good time to go hunting. I don't know. It just seems like to classify them as either nocturnal or a daytime, it just seems like they're very opportunistic at trying to find food.
Well, this thermal description really means that they're opportunistic about their napping too, about taking the sleeps. So they would sleep at multiple periods throughout the day. And I think what we're seeing is, and I think a lot of researchers would agree with this part at least, that at night they are bolder. So we're probably more likely to have encounters at night because they're willing to come into a closer proximity with us. But I don't know that they're necessarily more active at night.
Right, and well, see, that was my thing too. Is as far as going out and looking for Bigfoot, I've had so much more luck with drawing activity to me versus me going out and seeking activity, that I'm wondering if the nighttime activity isn't more aggravated or provoked activity. They may be resting at that 11 to 3 a.m. point because they've done whatever they had between their dust time. Think about like a big savanna cat. They're covered in hair. Okay, it's 98 degrees during the daytime, even in the mountain ranges. They're not moving when the sun is high in the sky. But as soon as the sun starts to peak and the temperatures start to drop, their body is going to realize that, and they're going to know, hey, it's time to go looking for something that's still laying around that's going to be easy to eat. And that was one of my things with, I keep seeing it get pushed that they eat a lot of deer, Mm-hmm. They might eat a lot of deer, but I think they might scavenge a lot of deer because that's a lot of effort for a 800-pound primate to use up that many calories hunting down a deer. Even in a pack mentality where you rush them into a brush, it's still, I can see picking up a rock and hitting a pheasant much more easier, or picking up a stick and knocking out a rabbit much more than going and chasing down a whitetail, twice a day or even twice a week.
Well, and I think it goes back to that opportunistic topic, in that a lot of times there's been sightings with them picking through rocks and getting small rodents, or whether that food source is a vegetable or a vegetable type food source or something like that. So once again, I think that they're going to be opportunistic, whatever those particular food sources are in that particular time of year or something. That's just my 2 cents. But
well, I think we tend to anthropomorphize. Is that a word?
Yeah, human qualities to an animal.
Like you look at humans and you go, wow, to get that big, that sucker must take in a whole lot of meat protein. But you look at the other great apes, you look at elephants, you look at moose, you look at even bear. West Coast bears, they feast on a lot of salmon, but most other bears, we got a lot of grizzly in here in Alberta, and it's a vegetarian diet that gets them to that mass and to that strength and everything. And I don't really see a reason for them to have to take in a whole lot of protein.
No, it's caloric intake, though. I mean, to be 800 pounds and 7 to 8 feet tall, you've got to take in 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day. You're not going to be doing that in protein. You're going to eat, half a pine bush. Right. You're going to eat 17 handfuls of cattails. And that's one of the things that I have noticed in some of the active areas in Florida and with this new skunk ape sighting that they've got going on down there. The water sources are drying up. And what happens around all the water sources that are left is the cattails are there one day, and then the banks all around the cattails are all mushy and beat up, and the cattails are gone. Well, where did they go? Something came and ate them. Well, bears aren't known to come in and eat cattails, but human survivalists are.
Right.
So why wouldn't a primate know that that's good carbohydrates coming out of those cattails? Skip?
Yeah, we've got a question from the chat room. Stefan, who's Canadian, wants to know if Tyler thinks that Parks Canada knows anything about Sasquatches in federal parks.
I think one mistake we make in general in thinking about government or government entities is we treat them as this faceless, nameless mass. And government is people and individuals, and I think that the federal parks are people and individuals, and I think that you get a lot of parks people who are open to it or have had experience or have had enough people report stuff to them that they're open to it. I don't know if there's an official recognition of them. I have had a few discussions with parks people. And that reminds me of one big myth that I kind of wouldn't mind addressing here, is that a lot of us have the feeling, anywhere in Canada and Alberta, BC, wherever, that, I hear it said a lot of times by different researchers, if anybody ever shot a Sasquatch, they'd be going to jail because they wouldn't have a permit for it. They'd have to pull a permit. So I approached Parks Canada and I said, listen, let's get to the bottom of this. And this came about because we'd heard that Rick Dyer had gotten a permit to come up here and hunt Sasquatch.
Oh, God.
And everybody's saying, if he did that, he's going to end up in jail. And I thought, well, let's just make sure about that because, it's good to know instead of just talking out our butts. So I approached one of the parks people and said, what would happen if somebody were to kill an animal that wasn't on a list of animals that you're okay to shoot? Like, you can shoot a squirrel, you can shoot rats, you can shoot da-da-da, nobody's going to get in a big fuss about it. And they said, well, what do you mean? And I didn't want to tell them what I was talking about, obviously, so I just kind of kept trying to play it out, saying, what if there was some animal that maybe wasn't supposed to be here or wasn't on the list or whatever? And they said, well, the best analogy I could come up with is it's not illegal to shoot or to kill a whale in Alberta because we're landlocked. We don't have any exposure to any ocean. And I said, okay, I think that's a great analogy. Something that's not supposed to be here, you're not going to be in trouble for killing because nobody's ever thought to put it on the books to define what the illegality is around it.
Right.
So I think that it would really apply to Sasquatch as well. If somebody shot one, it's not supposed to be there, and I don't know what you'd get charged under.
Well, that's the thing. Here in America, it's the same way. I mean, you can't protect something that isn't acknowledged to be on a protected species list.
Right.
I cannot go out and shoot, molest, touch, dream of, think of, or breathe on a bald eagle, on an American bald eagle. I mean, if you even collect a feather that fell off naturally, you're in possession of it, you go to jail. Okay, same thing with like a Florida manatee. But, I don't have any laws here in Tennessee that say I can't shoot a leprechaun. Let's think Patty J. Let's take it for that. I can go out and shoot a leprechaun or a unicorn or a sprite or a pixie all I want to in here in Tennessee, and I'm never going to go to jail. There is no fear of that. I mean, it's the same thing. And, I think Canada's got the biggest concentration of these animals to begin with. I'm really surprised that, they've had them on their stamps, they've had them on their coins. The state is itself, I call it a state because, that's what it is. It's a country, it's a state, I understand, but, you would think they'd have more recognition of interest in the animal itself if they're going to promote it on their currency and, on their government types of things as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. As far as the density goes, maybe, yeah. I always tend to think Washington's kind of like their ideal habitat. And then you start getting north, BC and Alaska, and you start going south, Oregon, California.
Right.
Definitely, we've got so much more open space and underdeveloped property.
Right. You have less human habitation there, which allows the animals to have free range without any type of interaction.
Well, we're bigger than the States. We've got more land mass. We've got 1/10 your population, and that 10th is all clustered within 200 miles of the American border. You get above that 200 kilometers, 200 miles from the border, and there's just nobody.
Yeah, but you're also approaching the Arctic Ring up there, so let's be fair. I mean, there isn't a whole lot of large mammal life. The further and closer you get to the Arctic Ring, you get specialized. You get specialized mammal life up there. You get the polar bear.
Yeah,
you get
polar
the
muskox.
Right,
Yeah.
but you don't get common mammal life up there. You get specialized cold weather type of mammal life up there. So I'm sure they're up there. But like the Snow Grove area where Dr. Meldrum went, and during the Monster Quest thing, that's what I'm talking about. If you really can get into an area where you're flown in, left in behind, and you can afford to stay there for 6 weeks, and do some provoking and attracting and get the animals into you, I think you're going to have a whole lot better getting something on film or on thermal or some kind of a DNA trap. That's my question is what comes next? Boots on the ground, that's what we're all talking about. We all want video and, we all want this, we all want that. But let's say that the video is done. Let's just say we now have Bigfoot on thermal video that we can prove is not human. We've gone through it. It's been totally analyzed. Let's just imagine that this has happened. Okay. So what comes next? Is it? Do you put one in a snare? Do you put one in a net? Do you get all Team Contra and build a super duper box? What comes next?
I know. What do you think on that one, Kip? I might have to think about that one a little bit.
I don't know.
I'd like to chime in on that one. I think in light of, hey everybody, this is Ro. By the way, I don't usually talk much on on this show. But in light of recent events, I don't think anybody's going to believe much of anything, because videos are so well hoaxed now. We even tried having hoaxed DNA, blah, blah, blah. I don't think anything short of a physical type specimen is going to do at this point in time. That's my personal
that was my
opinion.
thing. Like I agree completely. That's the idea. The next step, that's what we got to think about next, is because, okay, if I can get on, say, thermal footage that there's an animal there's bipedal, it walks, okay, and it's not a human, right? And I put some DNA snares out there, okay? Treble hooks on fishing line are invisible at night, okay? And I videotape or thermal tape these animals being caught on these traps. I now have proof. I have the collection, I have the evidence chain that shows where that DNA came from, and it's not human. Okay, so, that's the other thing, is you got to be prepared for what the next step is, and I don't think anybody's thinking about it.
I think one of the things that we run into as well is that everybody's doing their own thing. We don't have a set of protocols that everybody abides by, and so one of the issues that you run into is that chain of custody. It's one person to say, "Oh yeah, I took care of it this way. I had gloves." Another person said, "I didn't have any gloves. I just found this hair and I put it in a plastic bag." And so, we run into those situations. And I think I appreciate like what Bart Catino, when he talks about the evidence, which is really great evidence. A lot of his thermal sightings, he refers to it as compelling, not damning, but compelling, and I think that adds credibility to the experience. But I agree. I think that until we have a physical specimen that we can actually have science look at, and I know there's probably a lot of controversy on how that specimen would be collected, whether it would be found or collected, but nonetheless, I think that's what it will take.
And I think if we got a body, it would settle it. I mean, there can't be any questions after we got a body, obviously. But I don't think it's necessary yet. I think it's close to being necessary with all the crap that's gone on lately. But I think a lot of things get accomplished incrementally, brick by brick over time. And I think this is another one of those things that there can be a little bit of a straw in the camel's back kind of an effect. And we've got, so many eyewitnesses. We've got so many historical accounts from native cultures and that sort of thing. We've got, then we get into a little bit more physical evidence, such as the footprints and the tracks that, Meldrum's got so much on. And that's, building a little bit of evidence. And what you get is, you look at the history of Sasquatch and you see that at first it was all these really crazy characters and kooks and hardly anybody that was really into it. And they got to be outlandish because it's just such a crazy notion. But then a little bit of proof starts to be accumulated, or evidence at least starts to be accumulated, and suddenly it's not quite so out there to be interested in it, and you get a few more sort of not quite as kooky people interested in it, and suddenly you start getting a few scientists that are willing to dabble in it and not risking as much of their reputation to do it, and you get a little more evidence because of their involvement, and you keep going like that, and suddenly it becomes fairly reasonable for some decent biologist to stick their neck out and get really involved in the research, and maybe gets funded. And suddenly now you've got some good dedicated resources that are collecting hairs, and that people believe them when they collect hairs, and people believe them when they collect scat, and they've got some DNA to go with it. And suddenly you've got credible people putting their reputations on the line. And I think the war can be won by attrition, not just necessarily by the body that would be nice to get.
I agree completely. And what we need is a controlled chaos. Okay, I mean that's really what we have. Complete chaos right now. We have everybody out doing their own thing, having their own theories, searching their own areas, doing their own thing, and we need to get people on board. And the one thing I was just going to bring up was something new has come out, and it's cheap, and everybody needs to get a copy of it. And it is the Dr. Meldrum, Sasquatch, field guide. Everybody needs to get one of these. It'll put you on the right page. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's not big. It's cheap. I got mine from Amazon. Came in a few days. This isn't a commercial for Dr. Meldrum. It has great information in it for everybody. And if everybody can get on the same page with just the basic information, it'll go a whole lot further than 3,000 sets of people out in the woods, every summer long, screaming for Sasquatch. It's great that you want to have that encounter, but if you want to help the effort, we need the boots on the ground. We need people finding tracks. We need people finding locations that are not. Let's eliminate most of your state. Let's find out where they're not so that we can have a real good look at where they might be. And that effort's going to go a whole lot further along than anything else. And the other thing I was going to say, since I brought up his, is I have Robert Morgan's here, Robert Morgan's Field Guide, the old timer. Okay. Most of the book is his personal belief of how to have a Bigfoot encounter. However, 70% of the book is fantastic field research information. And, I bet nobody's read it. There's other people that are out there. Nobody's taking the time to really understand what field research is and how to do it. And, camping at the KOA and going out in the woods around the KOA and screaming at your neighbors isn't just, it just isn't going to get you what you're looking for anyhow. So instead of wasted effort, let's collectively get together and maybe, do something constructive for a change.
Tyler, I've often said that the term field researcher gets tossed around kind of liberally within the field. And what are your thoughts on the difference between an enthusiast versus a researcher?
Very, very glad you brought that up, Kip. Actually, pet topic of mine. Honestly, like, and something that Jeff said a minute ago too, like about being objective in your assessments of things. And Bart and I had sort of distant interaction with each other from both being in the BFRO. And I loved where I would see where he would talk about having gone to his sort of this pet site where he's gone with Bobo and he's gone with Robert Leiterman, and he's been out there like 50 times, and he'll have like one night of good encounters out of 50 times out there. And I'm like, okay, I like this guy. This guy's talking the truth. He's not having encounters every time. And so right away we had a meeting of the minds way back then. So I was really glad that this came about the way it did, where we got to sort of work together on something. That's great. And I think Bart's a good example of a really good field researcher. I mean, every time I talk to the guy, he's like out like once a week, it seems, twice a week sometimes out in the field. I'm not out as often as he is. I probably get out a couple times a month, maybe out for, and sometimes it's just, you're just out hiking and you need to get out of the city, you need a break, and you're looking for stuff while you're out there. And there's sort of this, nobody wants to just say, oh, I'm an enthusiast. There's nothing wrong with being an enthusiast, but just don't call yourself a researcher.
I'm a woodsman. I mean, I've spent my entire life camping in the woods. I've had 2 experiences that have drove me to want to learn more. And for 15 years in Florida research of myself, trying to find what it was that I had been experiencing, I learned a tremendous amount, but I was on my own. I wasn't out there videotaping. I wasn't out there. I've never found a track that I've been able to cast, or I would even call castable, because Florida's very difficult to get that type of thing from.
I don't usually even carry any casting materials, because where we're in the Rocky Mountains, it is so hard packed. Everything's rocky. But on the expeditions, we make sure we have, when we do an official X, we make sure we got all the stuff with us. Fortunately, we had some casting materials with us on the last one, and we had a couple days of rain, and that led up to our expedition, which is unusual for us here. We're in a pretty arid area, and we happened to get what I'm pretty well convinced is a good partial track, just the 4-foot. And that was really surprising to me. I never expected to be able to cast something.
And just to bring something up as far as casting materials go, something that's a real easy trick that most people don't know about is the slow expanding foam that you can buy at the Home Depot. Some cardboard and some rock. Okay, it's only a one-use can, so you're going to use that can on the entire thing. But take a piece of cardboard, put it in your backpack with a can of that foam, and if you find something that you want to cast, you slowly pour that foam into it, put the cardboard over it, and lay some rocks on it, and you'll at least get a usable enough track to know the size of it, how many toes it has. Yeah. I mean, and the foam really works well if there are ridges there. You just have to be real careful when you remove it. Leave the dirt there, dig it out, let it cure, and then take it home and use a brush and brush it out. But most people think they've got to carry around the plaster or the quickcrete and the water and everything else. If you're just out hiking in an area that you think might be active, take a can of that foam with you and a piece of cardboard, because you never know. And that's, it's $6. It's not the end of the world. And, you might just find the print of a lifetime. I'm praying one day I get to see a real full print. I've seen half prints. I've seen what I know are Sasquatch prints. I can't prove it because it wasn't all there. It wasn't worth casting. Go ahead, Kip.
Got a question in the chat room from Lee Kemp for Tyler, wanting to know if Tyler thinks that they eat moose.
Is he asking if they eat moose or eat the same things as a moose?
I guess maybe eat the same things as a moose. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that some of their diets would overlap. I mean, things like the roots of a lot of marshy grasses and that sort of thing are probably serve for both. I think the bear is the best model, but I think there'd be some overlap with the moose. I just like pointing to moose and or bear to the people that say, oh, there's no, I mean, like, especially talking about Canada where our environment's not that that friendly, shall we say. They say, oh, there's no way there's an 800-pound ape running around up there. Nothing that big's going to be able to survive. Well, moose and bear both survive, and they're both in the same size range.
Yeah, and a bear has a 250 square mile home range.
Right.
So, I mean, they move continuously to be able to eat.
Yeah.
And they've only got, they've got about the average pace as what a human has. So then you turn around to the Sasquatch, who's got a 7-foot gait with these great big long legs. The crotch is real high in a Sasquatch. They're made for locomotion to be able to move to where the food sources are. So if a bear's got a 250 square mile home range, a male Sasquatch has probably got a 400 square mile range.
Right. Yeah.
A 70-mile walk for a Sasquatch in a day is probably 12 hours of movement. So the question is which part of that 400 square mile environment is he in today?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that you just have an active area, you have an active giant area, and you have to then locate within that area where they're moving and why, where are the food sources within that home range that they're moving to and from, and where are the water sources, because I think that's the key. Water's the key to everything. Everything has to drink. If you can find out where they're getting their water from, that's where you set your camera traps. I don't really care what they're eating. Find where they're drinking. You're going to be a whole lot more successful than you are trying to figure out which part of that 1,000 acres he's eating on today.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's eating there today, he's not eating there tomorrow. Dandelion fields. Dandelions are huge amounts of calories for all birds eat them. Everything eats dandelions. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, anything that has nutritional value, I can imagine Sasquatch sitting down in the middle of the field, at night and just picking all the dandelions out of the field because he's hungry.
Well, talking about some of the opportunistic times that it seems like a lot of Native America or First Nation sightings have been, berry picking. So when berries are in bloom or whatnot, I mean, you've got bears, you've got Bigfoots. Or mushroom picking, for instance, in the Bluff Creek area with the Hoopa tribes. So once again, those food sources are kind of an opportunistic thing for them, and they're feeding about the same thing as a bear, so supporting a large mammal. So
I agree, absolutely. I got a friend, Stephen Rockwell, up in British Columbia. They get the most of their nighttime visitations and their howls and their movements and stuff during the mushroom picking seasons. Here in Tennessee, it is the berries. Here they started late this year, so we're just now getting ripe berries in the low areas where I'm at. So I'm really expecting the Bigfoot sightings to start rolling in here in Tennessee in the low areas, and they just move all the way up the elevations because the berries get ripe later in the higher elevations. So basically, they're all down here picking up all the great food because they've been starving all winter. And next thing you know, all the activities in the lowlands. Go ahead, Kip.
Yeah, Tyler. Another one was how did you develop your 10 protocols? Is that loaded?
Well, it's just it was trial and I'm sort of surprised everybody really appreciated them. I didn't think there was that much to them. It just sort of came about organically from the way things unfolded in trying to process Justin Smea's evidence when he gave it to us. Trial and error, learning. I just sort of hit the ground running when Justin had told me he was going to share some of the samples with me. I started trying to find good labs, and I thought it was going to be a really easy thing. I had a contact here in Calgary who owns his own lab and said, hey, I'll do the testing for you. I was like, hey, super. And that's what I told Justin at the beginning was I got a friend who's interested in Sasquatch and he'll do the testing for you. Well, it turns out his lab, not unlike Dr. Ketchum, works with more sort of veterinary issues. He works with a lot of farms, does a lot of animal testings, tests feces and soil samples and all this stuff for a lot of farms. And so I thought, even if he gets a test that tells him that there's some primate here, I'm still going to have to go to the next level of someone that's credible, that has credentials in this arena, to say what to really make of this sample. So why am I going to him first? So I bypassed that, spent about 2 to 3 weeks interviewing every lab I could find on Google across Canada that might be related to this. And it turns out, there's very few that there were a few that were willing to do it, but there were very few whose claims about it would have stood up in the end if we had found what we wanted to find. So that was the first thing, was really finding the right lab. I narrowed it down to 3. Of those two, I thought were the best. One I was leaning towards because it had worked a lot with archaic or ancient DNA, where there's a lot of degradation. But they dealt more with human, and I thought there was a chance that we're going to have some contamination on it. And so Trent University, sort of coincidentally, they do all of the wildlife forensic DNA testing for Canada and a lot for the States, but coincidentally, the head of the department, the director, Dr. Brad White, comes from a human genome background where he'd worked a lot in hospitals and done a lot of genomic research with humans. So he had a great overlap there. And then the rest, a lot of it was just sort of seeing mistakes as I saw them being made by the other people who had gotten hold of some of Justin's samples. I thought some of the things were really not done well with regard to signing over all authority and ownership and responsibility for the sample to another party. I didn't like that. I saw the communication and the motivation from my own lab sort of degrade over time. Initially, it was communications every day or a couple times a week, and they seemed like they're really on it. And then they sort of started to lose their enthusiasm and started communicating less frequently. And what I had been told were going to be the bills up front, so they were much different down the road. And so I saw a lot of things sort of not being clearly defined up front, limits and communication and a lot of different sort of criteria to define. So I just thought I'd put them all in a list to sort of help people if they run into the same thing.
Well, that's important too, because the Joe Bigfooter out there, that's the enthusiast that wants to help the cause. They don't understand how forensic you really need to be to avoid human contamination when collecting stuff. It's wonderful that you got it, but 90% of the stuff that came in, everybody had their fingers on.
And even if they didn't, I think that's another big myth that's good to address. In the labs that I spoke with, they really sound like, with how sensitive so many of the methods are these days, they sound like it's next to impossible to completely eliminate the chance for contamination. Even within labs, even at the lab that I used, they started testing the technicians to make sure that the human DNA they got wasn't the technician's DNA, because it's very common. You blink and an eyelash falls in. You sneeze, you breathe, any of these different things, it's very easy. And, I forget if it was, I don't want to misquote Meldrum, so I don't want to say it was him, but somebody I was speaking with that had a PhD background was talking about, relating to me a story of how they've come across human DNA when they've gone and cored into, old ancient mammoth or dinosaur remains or something. They core into the center of the bone and they're trying to make sure they got no contamination, and they still get some human presence in there out of it. So I think that
for somebody to claim that out of 100 samples, none of them were human contaminated, we tested for all of that and it's not possible, and then to only find human chromosome 11 in common, is just an outrageous, crazy statement.
Yeah, and the point I kind of want to make out of that is and maybe I'm wrong in saying this. You guys feel free to correct me, but I almost feel like don't freak out too much about the contamination aspect. No. If you go and see some hair and it's a matter of walking away and coming back the next day with gloves or not, just grab it. And most of these labs are going to be able to identify and say, yeah, there was some human contamination, but what we've really got here is this is what the source tissue was. So I kind of, maybe I'm a little negligent in that respect, but I figure the lab will sort it out to some extent.
Go ahead, Kip.
Well, there was another question. I'm going to see if I can pronounce this right. What does Tyler think about the Paranthropus origin of for Sasquatch theory? Did I pronounce that correctly?
I think it's Paranthropus, but
Paranthropus.
Yeah.
Yeah, what he just said.
Or Paranthropus. I'm not sure. I don't. So much. It's funny because so much of what I do is reading, and then I'll have a conversation with Dr. Meldrum or somebody, and they'll say that Denisova instead of Denisova or whatever, and I'm like, okay, I've never heard it said. I can only read it on the page. But
aluminium versus aluminum.
Sure,
how do you actually pronounce it?
Yeah, what's right in one country is wrong in a different country. Yeah. I know there's a lot. I think all of those theories, I don't really concern myself with them. I had a PhD recently who's helping us out on some stuff. Approach me and say, "What do you think about this? What do you think about that? What do you think about Rick Dyer?" And I was like, you know what? Like, I learned very early in this endeavor that if I don't confine myself to the things that I'm best at and that really interest me, this is a rabbit hole that's just going to go on forever and is going to swallow me whole. So at first, when I first got into it, 20 years ago, it was like reading all the different theories. Was it Gigantopithecus? Is it Paranthropus? Is it whatever? And I kind of went, none of that stuff matters until we find one. We're sort of putting the cart before the horse, and I just don't concern myself about it.
I agree. I could absolutely care less as to what it is. I had a humor interview with Cletus the other day, and I asked him about his organization, whether they were pro kill or pro capture or whatever, and he said the funniest thing ever, simply, right now I think all organizations ought to be pro find. Let's not really care about what's going on. We ought to be pro-find that's going out there. And, of course, it was done in humor. It was a parody piece. But, I mean, that's what it comes down to. We don't care what your organization is about. Let's just get on the same board and let's get it found before we really care about what it is.
Right.
And, we had a big opportunity here, and unfortunately it was taken advantage of, and we didn't get out of it what we were expecting. And, bad science is bad science, no matter how you put it. And if you're not willing to let somebody else retest your bad science and prove it, then you've just proven it's bad science to begin with. It's I'm sorry, if I tell you my car can do 100 miles an hour and you get in it and I can't do 100 miles an hour in my car, well, then obviously my car doesn't do 100 miles an hour, and it's just I'm full of crap. So, and it's a shame. However, there was that other side that the nuclear DNA, where archaic hominid that they wanted to claim. That's the suck part of it, is I think she might have had something and just ignored it completely. Where's the data on that strange lemur thing that she's talking about? Let's talk about that versus the hybrid part of it. Let's actually look at all that data. None of that stuff got released.
Yeah, I think pretty what insight that I trust on. Anyways, I'm not saying it's coming from me. It's not coming from me. It's coming from my PhDs, because I had someone from the Melba camp contact me about that lemur thing way before they ever released the report. It was so it was right after the release of actually it might even before. It was right around the end of December or beginning of January, either just before or just after I released the Trent report. And it was someone who was trying to, again, persuade me to doubt my lab's results because they'd seen the data and it was clearly a lemur. And we're not a lemur, or and
we're lemur. You have lemur. I have lemur. Kip has lemur. I mean, we're all primate. So what's so fantastical about the lemur data?
Well, and here's my thing. So somebody asked me about Paranthropus. I'm not an anthropologist. I got no opinion on it. Somebody wants to tell me that there's indications this animal is lemur. I'm not a geneticist. Maybe if you sound like you've got credentials, I'm going to try to suss that out. I'm not going to just say no. I'm going to try to do some research on it. So that's what I did when he told me that. I contacted people who would know better than me, who should know better than me, biologists, PhDs in biology, geneticists, whatever they were, and said, did this make any sense? And they're like, no, Sasquatch is far-fetched enough. We don't need to make this worse.
Exactly. You've already got a 7-foot primate, 800 pounds, running around the North American continent. Let's not make it any friggin' stranger than it really needs to be.
And I'll be totally honest with you. I mean, Justin's encounter has some characteristics to whatever he shot that are not consistent with most stories, and do have some things that make it a bit more consistent with a lemur-type animal. He talked a bit more about a muzzle than most people describe. The hands were a little bit different with pads, a few things like this. And so this fellow that approached me was saying, this proves it. This is what it has to be then, lemur. I can just look at these FASTA files, and I can tell by looking at the FASTA files that it's got this type of nose, it's got this type of characteristics, and I'm kind of buying all this as the guy's telling me all this. I'm like, wow, this guy really knows his stuff. He's not even a geneticist, turns out. So I started checking with people about it, and they're like, this guy can tell that by looking at a FASTA file? Like, no, that doesn't happen.
Right.
And then they started, but still we didn't have Melba's data to work with to really,
we still don't, by the way.
Well, okay, we had none at the time to make any sort of even informed opinion on this theory.
Right.
Other than that everybody I talked to about it, who were all PhDs, said this is nuts. But then once the data came out, I had a few contacts that were willing to try to take that data, parse it, and I posted a lot of their insights on the BFF, for one thing. And they said, here's what's going on with this data. We've got human sequences here, and we've got bear sequences here. And in between them are artifacts and unknowns, and these artifacts are common in Illumina testing, and they've highlighted them for me and shown me where these common artifacts and the sequences are. They said, if you take, and the way we know this is human and this is bear is because if, just to check myself here, I went, not me, this is my PhD, just to check myself, I took this set of sequences and I ran them through, and it says 100% human match. And then I ran this part of the sequences through, and it says 100% bear match. There's no ambiguity. There's no like it's maybe this or it's maybe that. And the problem is when you put them together, GenBank then says, okay, and that's what GenBank's always doing, is what's the closest to what you've just fed me? So it sees when it's got some human and it's got some bear. For instance, in GenBank, there's only a full genome for panda. There's apparently no full genomes for like Ursus americanus, like American black bears. So it's finding the things that are closest. So it pulls up some panda, and it's like, well, it's got some human, and it's like, and so suddenly you've got to go way back to our supposed progenitors to find something that's got the DNA that we've got some of it, and another animal's got some of it. You got to find a common ancestor way back. Well, you know, according to evolutionary theory, that's what they would say is what was a predecessor to all of us, and so that's why it goes that route to the lemurs and the pandas and all the different
things.
Right,
and you know, had there been parrot DNA and some goldfish DNA in there, she'd have been claiming the Bigfoot could fly and breathe underwater. Right. I mean, you know, you know, you just can't make this stuff up. Kip, is there another question from the chat room there? Kip, you're on mute, buddy. Can't hear you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah,
quick question was from Racer X. Does Tyler think Bigfoot make shelters or utilize caves or cave-like debris from fallen boulders?
You know, it's obviously speculation here, but I think rational logic surrounding this would point to the fact that they would want some shelter, especially in a lot of our Canadian winters, and especially at those high altitudes. We've got a lot of caves in the Calgary area when you get into foothills here. I don't know why they wouldn't utilize those. I've got some interesting information that I haven't been able to completely suss out from Alberta right now that holds some promise if it's true. That might shed some light on that cave scenario. And I wish I'd been trying to talk to the fellow that reported this to me for the past week here, and we haven't been able to get a hold of each other. I probably could have had some more information to report to you today about that, but I think it's pretty likely that they use caves, and we get a lot of reports around here too of people have even singled out some caves where they're like, hey, it seems like that's its home territory right there, sort of thing. So,
well, that's one of my things too with the whole shelter thing is I tell people I don't know, I really don't know. I've never found one in it. However, I do know that I found bear den, and I do know that I know it's bear den because I can smell it. You can tell that a bear has been there. There's a whole crap load of bear hair in there. So if you're claiming that there's a Bigfoot den or that's where somebody's sleeping, there ought to be just a ton of evidence to support the fact that they're there. Because if there isn't, then I have a problem with it. Because there's, you know, you have to have corroborating evidence to go along with your claim, or your claim is just conjecture. Kip?
Yeah, we've got time for, it looks like one more question. This kind of is an interesting one. You know, we look at Sasquatch, Bigfoot as something that obviously it doesn't make fire, but it would look for shelter. It's opportunistic. And Sarah and Chris are asking, is Bigfoot evolving? Is this something that you feel is evolving? I mean, that's kind of an interesting question.
Well, I would take that, the true meaning of evolving as well. I'm not trying to make a comment here on whether you believe in evolution or creationism or what, but at its root, is it changing? Every animal has to change and adapt. I think every animal on the planet has to change and adapt, or it doesn't survive. So yeah, I would say it is. If they're talking about a real punctuated, rapid evolution where they're suddenly learning to make fire and all those sort of things, are we going to see that within our lifetime where we haven't seen them use fire, and by the time I die we're going to have stories of them using fire? The smarter they are, the quicker they learn. I mean, our own adaptation is rapidly increased as far as the rate goes over the last 50 years, because the more you learn, the more it's easier to learn more stuff. But I don't think they're probably evolving any faster or more slowly than really anything else is. But
my one comment on
firefighter, it would be interesting to find out if they are starting fires out there. So,
well, my one comment would be this: it's simple. I mean, if you give a chimpanzee a lighter, a Bic lighter, and teach him how to light it, okay, he'll light the lighter. But if you put that on a chain or on a rope and tie it to his foot and let him carry it off into the woods, he might play with it for a little while. But I doubt very seriously he's picking up kindling and beginning to make fire, and he's going to cook his next meal. So, that's the thing. You got David Pilates who say, Bigfoot used to use fire, but now they know that it gives away their location, so they stopped using fire. Now, to de-evolve out of the use of fire is complete crap.
They also don't leave their magazines around anymore because people find those and they know where they're at.
Right. And according to the Good Crow magazines that he bought up and read all the stories of, they're not only not using fire anymore, but they're capturing your women and your children, some to eat and some to breed with. So, I don't know what camp they're following, but I think it's fantastic. I want to thank you, Tyler, for joining us. I really do. It's been a fantastic interview. It really has.
Absolutely.
For Kip Morrill, I'll give a shout out to Mitchell Wilson from the Squatchers Lounge, and Sweet Sassy Glassy on Etsy for the greatest one of a kind artwork you'll ever see. We got Tyler from the BFO, our field investigator, Kip Morrill from Jihad Productions. I mean, we just got it all. Thank you very much, everybody.
Richter and Steve.
Shout them out, guys.
All right.
Take care.
You have been listening to the Squatchers Lounge podcast for the last 55 minutes or so. We want to thank you for tuning in. We will be back in 2 weeks with a bigger and better show, always taking it up a notch. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to our guest, Tyler Huggins, not Higgins, and to my beautiful co-host or dual host, the Reverend Jeffrey Kelly, and the handsome Kip Morrill. Ladies and gentlemen, that is our time. We will see you guys later.
Take care, guys.